What if the voice in your dreams wasn't just a nightmare, but a queen, sealed in silence for 1,000 years, waiting for you to set her free? One touch in the ruins changed everything. Now, he's marked. She's awakening. And the ship? It's no longer theirs. This isn't just a story. It's a descent into the unknown, where one man holds the fate of an ancient power, and the line between savior and weapon is fading fast. Keep watching. The whisper in the void has only just begun. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The wind moved like a ghost through the empty bones of the planet. It howled through the cracks in the stone, slipping between jagged walls and fallen towers. Fine dust and ash blew in swirls, brushing against the cracked helmet of Nolan as he stepped deeper into the ruins. His boots crunched against the brittle surface, breaking pieces of old war machines and shattered bones. The silence was heavy, only broken by the soft scrape of his steps and the quiet hum of his suit. He had been to many dead worlds, but this one was different. It didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting. Nolan's suit was old, patched in more places than he could count. The paint had long worn off, and the chest plate still bore the scars of a mining accident on Darun 7. But it still worked. The light on his helmet flickered and danced across the walls, revealing ancient carvings, symbols and spirals, lines and marks so old they looked like they had been cut into the stone by the wind itself. Behind him, a small figure followed in silence. Tiri, the alien child they had rescued from a drifting sleep pod, walked without speaking. Her silver eyes scanned everything. She barely talked, barely ate. The crew had tried to get her to open up, but only Nolan had earned a few soft words from her, often late at night when the stars outside the ship felt too close. The others had stayed behind on the hollow drift, the exploration ship that had brought them to this forgotten moon. Most of the crew believed there was nothing here, just an old battleground from a war that predated human space travel. They said this place was dead, but Nolan didn't believe that. He felt something the moment they landed, a pressure in the air, a weight on his chest. Something unseen just beyond the edge of reason. "What is this place?" he whispered, mostly to himself. Tiri didn't answer. She just looked ahead, eyes wide, her small hands gripping the loose fabric of her cloak. Nolan turned his attention back to the path. Two enormous stones stood on either side, leaning toward each other like the entrance to a long-forgotten temple. Strange writing curled across their surfaces. Bones were half buried in the dust, some large, others small, none fully human. The deeper they moved into the ruins, the more the air felt heavy. Like the planet remembered the people who had walked here before. He knelt beside a cracked stone slab, brushing his gloved fingers over a symbol glowing faintly in the dust. It was a spiral with a single tear down the middle, like a wound. As his fingers touched it, the symbol pulsed softly. Behind him, Tiri gasped. "Don't touch that," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Nolan turned, surprised by the fear in her eyes. "Why?" he asked. She trembled. "It remembers." He laughed, but it didn't feel right. His voice sounded too loud. "Remembers what?" She didn't answer. She just looked at him like he wasn't entirely there anymore, like a shadow had passed over his face. Still, Nolan stood and kept moving. Something glowed in the distance beneath the broken frame of what had once been a tower. The ground sloped downward, cracked open like something massive had broken free. Curiosity burned in his chest. "I have to see," he said aloud. Tiri grabbed his arm suddenly, her small fingers surprisingly strong. "Please," she said, louder this time. "Please don't touch it. Not you." He frowned. "Why not me?" She looked straight at him, eyes shimmering with something more than fear. "Because it chooses, and if it chooses you, you won't come back." Nolan hesitated, but only for a moment. He pulled away gently. "I'll be fine," he said, forcing a smile. Then he stepped into the opening. The tunnel led down into the dark, The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, like it carried the weight of time. The walls were covered in twisted vines made of black metal, growing like roots across the stone. At the center of the chamber below was something resting on a cracked pedestal. It looked like a heart, made of gold, bone, and crystal. It pulsed with a slow, steady beat. Nolan stared. His hand lifted without thinking. He didn't want to touch it, but something inside him reached anyway. A whisper filled his mind. Touch it. No. Thierry's voice echoed from above. But his fingers met the surface. Everything went black. Nolan opened his eyes and found himself standing on nothing. Stars stretched beneath him, around him, everywhere. The silence here was perfect and terrifying. In front of him stood a tall figure wrapped in shadow, a crown of floating light above her head. Her eyes were deep and endless. She looked at him and smiled. "You came," she said, her voice like music heard underwater. Nolan tried to speak, but no sound came. She drifted toward him and placed a hand on his chest. Pain bloomed, sharp and burning. He looked down. The mark was there now, the spiral, the tear, glowing through his suit, glowing through his skin. "You belong to me now," she whispered. Then, he was falling back into his body. He gasped for breath as dust filled his lungs. Thierry was beside him, her face wet with tears. "It chose you," she whispered. "You touched the seal." The mark on his chest burned quietly. The ruins around them seemed to lean in, listening again. Nolan looked up, his voice shaking. "What did I do?" Thierry's answer came like a shadow over his heart. "You didn't wake her," she said. "You freed her." Nolan sat alone in the medical bay, staring at the glowing mark on his chest through the torn fabric of his undersuit. The pain had faded, but the burn remained. It pulsed slowly like a second heartbeat, bright gold against his skin. He touched it lightly, half expecting it to vanish like a dream. But it was real. Every breath he took felt heavier, like the air around him had changed since the moment he touched that heart-shaped object in the ruins. Since the moment she spoke to him in the void. He hadn't told the others what happened, just that he slipped and passed out. Captain Horan didn't ask many questions. The captain had seen enough strange things in the deep stretches of space to know when to leave something alone. But Lyra, the ship's medic, and Nolan's oldest friend on the hollow drift, knew something wasn't right. She watched him carefully as she ran scans, her dark hair tied back and her hands steady. "This mark," she said softly, adjusting the scanner. "It's not like anything I've seen. It's not a burn, it's reacting." "Reacting to what?" Nolan asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Everything," she replied. "To your heartbeat, your temperature, even your thoughts maybe." Nolan gave a small laugh, but it was hollow. "So, I'm a science project now." Lyra didn't smile. "You scared me, Nolan. We thought we lost you in there." He looked away. "I think something followed me back." That night he didn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling of his cabin, the glow from the mark casting soft shadows on the walls. The rest of the crew slept soundly, unaware. But Nolan couldn't stop remembering the woman's face, tall, cloaked in shadows, her eyes like twin galaxies pulling him in. Her voice had been soft, but it echoed through him still. "You belong to me now." Outside, the stars moved slowly, silent observers to his thoughts. He closed his eyes and opened them somewhere else. He stood again on the floor of stars. The space around him was still and endless. The woman waited in front of him, just as before. Her cloak moved like smoke. Her crown floated above her head, spinning. She didn't speak at first, she just watched him, her eyes never blinking. "I don't understand," Nolan said. His voice worked here, though he didn't know how. "What do you want from me?" "You touched the seal," she said. "Now you are the key." He stepped back. "The key to what?" "To my return." "I didn't mean to," he shouted. "It was an accident." She tilted her head slightly. "The seal only opens to those it chooses." Something behind her shifted in the void, a ripple in the stars. a distant sound like thunder rolling through a canyon. She stepped closer. Her hand reached out and brushed the center of his chest. The mark flared with pain again, sharp and white. "You have opened the path," she said, "and now I walk it." Nolan woke gasping, heart racing. The ship lights flickered for a second, then returned to normal. Sweat dripped down his back, and the mark was glowing bright. He didn't know how much longer he could hide this. The dreams were growing stronger. The next day, strange things began happening on the ship. Doors hissed open with no command. The lights in the hall dimmed when Nolan passed. In the mess hall, a tray floated for half a second before dropping. Revan, one of the technicians, dropped his spoon and stared. "Did anyone else see that?" he asked, eyes wide. Lyra narrowed her eyes but said nothing. Later, Nolan sat in the common room with Tiri. She hadn't spoken much since they returned, but tonight, she looked at him differently, like she already knew what was coming. "She's in your dreams now, isn't she?" Tiri asked quietly. Nolan nodded. "You knew this would happen." Tiri looked down. That place, it wasn't just ruins. It was a cage. Nolan stared at her, the weight of her words hitting like a punch. "She was locked away?" "She was powerful," Tiri said. "Too powerful. They couldn't destroy her, so they buried her voice and sealed it inside a dead world. But she remembers, and now, so do you." Nolan stood, anger building. "Why didn't you say something before?" "Because it was already too late the moment you touched the seal." He stormed out of the room, but no matter where he went, the ship felt smaller, tighter, like it was watching him. In the observation deck, he stared out into the stars, hoping for silence. Instead, the voice returned, quiet and firm. "My flame. My chosen." His hands trembled. Down in engineering, Revan was doing a routine systems check when the lights blinked out. In the dark, he saw symbols flicker across the walls, spirals, broken lines, sharp edges of language no one spoke anymore. He called out, but the radio only answered with static. Then, he disappeared. By morning, they found his tools scattered on the floor. The reactor door was open, but there was no trace of him. Nolan watched as Captain Horan stared at the logs in disbelief. The entire crew was shaken. No one had seen Revan leave, and on Nolan's chest the mark pulsed faster. The silence in the hollow drift was no longer peaceful. It was the kind that pressed against your skin. Too still, too deep. After Revan vanished, no one could sleep. Every sound felt louder, every shadow longer. The crew walked the halls of the ship with quiet footsteps and whispered voices, as if afraid to wake something they couldn't see. Nolan felt the tension everywhere, how eyes followed him, how conversations stopped when he entered a room. The mark on his chest was no longer just a secret. Everyone could feel something was different. Sana, the ship's historian, had started digging into the records of the ruins. She was quiet and serious, always reading, always watching. She barely looked up from her screen when Nolan came to see her, but she slid a file across the table without a word. He opened it. Inside were sketches, translations, and symbols. One in particular caught his attention. A spiral with a single break down the middle, the same symbol that now pulsed on his skin. "That symbol," Sana said softly, "appears in records from more than 5,000 years ago, across systems, across species, always tied to destruction." Nolan looked up at her. What was it? She hesitated. A queen, a ruler from a time before history. They called her the Veiled One. The stories say she had no army, no weapons, only her voice. And her voice made people follow, love and destroy. She was exiled, locked away in a prison made of memory. Nolan stared down at the mark, now dimly glowing through his shirt. "And I opened the door." Sana nodded. Or maybe she was never really gone. Maybe she was just waiting. That night, Nolan dreamed again. He stood in a hall of mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of himself. Some broken, some lost, some wearing the same crown the queen wore. She appeared, From the shadows, tall and silent, her eyes never leaving his. He didn't run, there was no point. She moved closer, her voice soft like silk. "You feel me now," she whispered. "Not just in dreams, in your breath. In your blood." "I don't want this," he said. "I didn't choose you." She raised a hand and touched his cheek. "But I chose you." He tried to back away, but the mirrors melted into stars. Her eyes flashed, and for a second he felt everything. Her sorrow, her rage, her loneliness stretched over centuries. It overwhelmed him. He screamed, but there was no sound in the void. He woke on the floor of his cabin, cold sweat soaking his clothes. His hands shook, and the mark burned. When he touched it, the pain spread like fire through his veins. The next morning, the crew found strange symbols carved into the walls of the engineering bay. Spirals, circles, unfamiliar marks. They hadn't been there before. Captain Horan called a meeting. Everyone gathered in the control room, tense and tired. The red emergency lights made their faces look older, more afraid. "This has to stop," Horan said. "One of us is missing, and now we're finding symbols like this all over the ship. Someone needs to speak." No one said anything. Then Thierry stepped forward. Her voice was soft but steady. "It's him." Nolan's heart dropped. She pointed at him. "He's the reason she's waking." Whispers filled the room. Nolan stood still, too shocked to speak. "I didn't kill Revan," he said finally. "I've done nothing wrong." Thierry shook her head. "You didn't have to. She moves through you. You opened the path. Now she's using you." "That's not fair," Nolan said, turning to the others. "I didn't ask for this." Sana stepped beside Thierry. "It doesn't matter if you asked. You're still the door." The room fell silent. One of the engineers, a young man named Darren, muttered, "Maybe we should leave him behind." Nolan stared at him. "What? You want to throw me out the airlock?" "We've already lost one of us," someone else said. "How many more before we act?" Horan raised a hand. "Enough. We don't know what's happening yet, but I need every one of you to stay calm. No one is being left behind." The meeting ended in silence, but the look in their eyes said more than words. They were afraid, and worse, they were beginning to fear Nolan. Later that night, Nolan stood alone in the ship's small bathroom, staring into the mirror. The mark had grown. The spiral now stretched toward his collarbone. Glowing veins pulsed from its center, reaching across his chest like cracks in glass. He touched it. It felt alive. Behind him, the lights flickered. He turned, expecting a crewmate, maybe Thierry again. But the room was empty. Then, faintly, he heard her voice. "You are almost ready." Nolan gripped the edge of the sink, trying to breathe. He didn't know what was happening to him, but one thing was clear. The Queen was no longer trapped in dreams. She was waking up, and she was using him to return. He could feel her inside his thoughts, inside his body. He didn't know how to stop it. He didn't know if he could. But as he looked into his reflection, eyes dark, veins glowing, he knew one thing. This wasn't over, and whatever came next, the hollow drift wouldn't survive it. Nolan couldn't sleep anymore. When he closed his eyes, he didn't dream, he drifted. Sometimes he found himself standing in dark corridors filled with whispering stars. Other times he floated in the Queen's endless void, hearing her voice like it was part of his own thoughts. The mark on his chest had nearly reached his throat, now the spiral glowing even through layers of fabric. The crew avoided him. Conversation stopped when he entered a room. No one looked him in the eye. He had become something they didn't understand, and maybe didn't trust. Only Lyra still spoke to him like he was the same person. But even she looked tired. She watched him too closely, her worry buried beneath her calm voice. "You need to tell me the truth," she said one night, sitting across from him in the empty mess hall. All of it. So he did. Everything. The Queen's voice, the visions, the way she touched his thoughts. He told her about the mirrors, the stars, and the way the ship seemed to respond to him. He told her he felt like a passenger in his own. Mind Lyra listened without speaking, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You need to make a choice. Either you find a way to stop this, or we all fall with you." That same night, the lights across the hollow drift flickered and died. Emergency power hummed on, casting a red glow through the corridors. The ship trembled, not from damage, but from something deeper. The Queen's presence had fully entered their world. Nolan could feel her watching through every wire, listening through every breath. Then came the scream. It echoed through the ship like metal being torn apart. The crew ran to the source, a storage bay sealed shut. When they forced it open, they found Sana inside, her back against the wall, eyes wide in shock. Symbols burned across the walls around her. Spirals. Broken circles. A new mark had formed. Above the door, pulsing faintly like the one on Nolan's chest. "She came through," Sana whispered, tears on her cheeks. "She's real." Captain Horan gathered the crew in the central chamber. There were only 9 of them left now. The room was tense, filled with fear and questions no one could answer. Nolan stood off to the side, separate, his presence an unspoken, "Wait. This has gone far enough," Horan said. "We need to put him in isolation." "I'm not infected," Nolan replied. "I'm not a threat." "You're the crown," Thierry said quietly from the far corner. Everyone turned to look. At Hare, she didn't flinch. "You're the piece she needed. You opened the seal. Now she's using you to return." "I didn't ask for this," Nolan said, his voice cracking. Thierry stepped forward. "She doesn't ask. She chooses. And she chose you." Horan looked at Nolan, then the others. "Do you have any control left?" Nolan hesitated. The answer was no. Not completely. That night, he stood alone in the engine room, the hum of the core beneath his feet. The Queen's voice echoed inside him. "You fear me, but you were made for me. You are my flame." Nolan dropped to his knees, head in his hands. "Why me?" A soft light appeared before him. Not the Queen this time. Thierry. She had followed him. "You don't have to give in," she said. "You can end this." "How?" he asked. "She's inside me." Thierry knelt beside him and touched the mark on his chest. "Because inside you, she remembers what she forgot." Nolan stared at her. "What do you mean?" "She was locked away because she became a monster. But before that, she was something else. She was mercy. She was light. You still feel that?" "I'm not strong enough." "Yes, you are," she said, "because you still feel pain. That means you're still you." Nolan closed his eyes and took a slow breath. Then he stood. He walked through the hollow drift, alone, until he reached the observation deck. The Black Star was there now, pulsing in space, just beyond reach. It called to him. It had always been calling. He placed his hand on the glass and the mark on his chest burned bright. Then, without speaking, he opened the hatch and stepped into the light. He didn't die. He didn't burn. He drifted into the Black Star, and it welcomed him. Inside, he found her waiting. The Queen stood tall, her cloak of smoke drifting behind her. She didn't speak. Nolan walked forward, not with fear, but with purpose. "You don't have to take," he said. "You can choose to give." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you offer?" "Memory," he said. "The part of you that loved, that forgave." She looked at him for a long time. Then she touched the mark on his chest. It flared, then dimmed. Her voice was a whisper. "You remind me of what I was." She began to fade, turning to light and dust. "You are free," she said. "And so am I." Nolan opened his eyes on the hollow drift, lying on the cold floor. Thierry was beside him. "It's over," he whispered. Outside, the Black Star was gone. The mark on his chest had faded to a faint scar, and for the first time in days, the silence was peaceful again.